So thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Perry Plantenberg. I'm a UC Berkeley student. I'm a leader with Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action, and I'm excited to welcome you to the Berkeley Mayoral Candidate Forum on Climate and Food Justice. Hosted by Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action, this forum is organized by Berkeley students as well as members of the community. This virtual event is nonpartisan and all candidates for mayor were invited to attend. The purpose of this forum is to elevate the issues of climate and food justice and provide the opportunity for candidates to share their stances on these topics so voters can make an informed decision in the November 5th election. Thank you all for joining. First off, thank you to our partners, Giltracts Community Farm, 350, East Bay, and Cal Habitat for Humanity. Another note is that there will be audience questions later in the forum, and they do not necessarily reflect the views of the host organization nor the partners. I would also like to thank the Berkeley Mayoral candidates for participating in this forum, Kate Harrison, Adena Ishii, and Councilmember Sophie Hahn. Thank you for joining us today. And now I'm excited to pass it to Andy to continue with the schedule.
Thank you. So as for the schedule, we'll start with a short introduction from each of the candidates, and then we'll have two sections, one for climate and one for food justice. Each section will be asking questions of each candidate. The questions were not shared with any of the candidates beforehand. We'll likely have time for a couple of audience questions per section. Please enter your questions using the Q&A feature, ideally before the Q&A section starts. For fairness, we'll be rotating with candidate answers, We'll be rotating which candidate answers each question first. And we'll end with a closing statement. Now I'm excited to pass it on to Theo, who will be moderating the next section of the forum.
Thank you, Andy. Hi, everyone. My name is Theo. I'm a UC Berkeley student and a co-chair for the Sustainability and Climate Committee at Cal Habitat for Humanity. And alongside Kiani, I'll be the moderator for the candidate introductions as well as the climate portion of this forum. For the candidate introductions, we invite each of you to introduce yourself to the forum and share a bit about your vision for our community. You will each have up to 1 minute. Please begin with your name and pronouns, and we will start with Adena Ishii. You can start whenever you're ready.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adena Ishii. I'm a candidate for mayor. Hopefully it's not too loud in the background. I apologize. I couldn't get to a quieter space. I've been living here for nearly half my life. I started as a student at Berkeley City College, got very involved in the budget cuts to education, organizing my peers on rallies up to Sacramento. I was the youngest and first woman of color elected president of the League of Women Voters, which is a nonpartisan political organization. The things that I'm connected to in this organization and these organizations in particular is that I'm someone who's experienced food insecurity and housing insecurity. And so these are issues that I care a lot about. I'm focused on housing and homelessness, public safety and infrastructure. And I think one thing that I just want to say to kind of set the tone here is to say that I feel like when we talk about climate justice, we're oftentimes not able to connect with low income communities of color. And so I'm really excited to explore that and what I think about that in the questions that you have for us here today. I recently received some great endorsements from State Senator Nancy Skinner and other folks that I'll tell you about later. Thanks.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Now we'll hear from Kate Harrison. You can begin whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you very much for having us here today. The time that I've spent on the council has been focused squarely on the twin crises of climate and inequality in our community. I created the Climate Equity Fund, which helps low-income homeowners and tenants make changes to their homes to reduce GHG emissions. I created EV parking for tenants who don't have parking in their parking lot in their buildings. I am in favor of Measure FF, which is on the ballot this year, created bike lanes throughout my council district. I'm also interested in root causes, not boutique solutions. To do that, we have to take on moneyed interests. I'm in favor of the natural gas ban that we push forward through the council, and I'm supporting Measure G on this year's ballot, GG, on the gas tax. And finally, I recognize that humans are not the center of the universe. We have to promote biodiversity. We have to think about bird safe glass, which I got passed by the council. We must, and we did, get rid of Golden Gate Fields, which was operating here in maltreating horses. And I do support Measure DD. Environmentalism and animal rights activism are an act of love and not for the faint of heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. Now we'll hear from Councilmember Sophie Hahn. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I have been doing environmental work and fighting climate change my entire life. I don't just talk about these issues and have opinions, I've taken action. My parents moved to Berkeley to embrace civil rights, and I attended Berkeley's first integrated school. From my father's shoulders, I watched free speech and anti-war protests, and our family embraced recycling, Earth Day, and natural food, at that time, very kind of far out ideas. My record is unmatched among the candidates, which is why I'm endorsed by the prestigious Jane Fonda Climate PAC and the League of Conservation Voters, and I'm the only council member in this race. I was elected 5 times to the executive board of our local Sierra Club. I founded an urban farm in CSA that has been providing 0-mile organically grown local produce for 12 years. I got my start in politics by writing Berkeley's first urban ag laws. I've authored groundbreaking legislation that's moving the needle, and I'm just excited to discuss all of that with you during our time together today.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. Now, onto the climate portion of this forum. This forum would like to acknowledge the global and national devastation of climate change fueled events like wildfires, hurricanes, and floods. And we are focused on what we can do locally to implement climate solutions. For this forum, the mayoral candidates will have up to 1.5 minutes to answer each question. We will also have time for questions from the audience, so please start thinking about your climate questions now. The city of Berkeley has set ambitious goals to reduce transportation emissions, which make up about half of the city's carbon footprint. How will you prioritize and expand accessible public transit, biking, and walking infrastructure, especially for underserved communities, to meet our emission reduction targets? We will start with Kate Harrison. You will have up to 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the prompt. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. In my time on council, I chaired the infrastructure committee for nearly the entire time and was on the budget committee. And as part of that, I was able to get bike lanes on Milvia in my district, Fulton Street, Oxford is coming next, and Bancroft, by working with the community. Sometimes older people are a little fearful of change, and I was able to talk them through how this could benefit them, how this could be better for bikes and pedestrians both. As I mentioned, I supported FF. I also introduced the transit-free pilot process. It has not yet passed the council, but I think it's a good model for getting people used to taking transit. We also need to charge commercial entities who have large parking lots for their space. Right now, people like Bear pay nothing for the giant number of parking spaces that they have. And the university is building a large parking lot on the corner of Oxford and Bancroft right over the bike lane that we just created. We need to fight this and make sure that we do not favor these large institutions and their parking goals. I push forward green spaces that also invite more people to walk. We have to have a walkable, pleasant environment for people to be interested in walking. That requires that we have benches, trees, and a sense of nature coming into the city. We also worked very hard on a quick build process where I passed the Uber and Lyft tax, which charges for those rides, and we can use that for bike safety when emergencies occur, like when a child was hit trick-or-treating last year on Derby Street. We were able to create safety amendments right away. So I'm working through the budget, through the process, and through the laws to make sure that we can accomplish these goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Sophie Hahn.
Well, thank you. I championed East Bay Community Energy, which has brought 100% renewable energy to every Berkeley electricity customer. And as a result of that, we were able to switch everyone in Berkeley to 100% renewable energy. It's the single largest reduction in GHG emissions that our city has experienced ever. What that has done is it has brought emissions down from the building sector, and the transportation sector is now our #1 source of GHG emissions. And this is the next really big challenge that we have to tackle as a city. And it is one of my top priorities as mayor, to go far beyond what we've been talking about, a little bit here, a little bit there, and really figure out how to do something transformative for Berkeley. We need to get a large number of people to give up cars entirely. Then we need to get a larger number of people to reduce the amount of travel in gas-powered vehicles. And they need to switch that out for bikes, walking, and public transit. And there may be a small number of people in Berkeley who just are going to depend on a vehicle. We have a world that is designed for private vehicles, but we need realistic plans. And that's the first thing I'm going to do. A comprehensive plan to transition Berkeley away from fossil fuel-based transit and reduce our transit emissions by 50%.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. Next, we'll hear from Adena Ishii.
Yeah, I love that you have the question written out for us. I find that's very helpful because, I think, your question here is really focused on public transit, biking, and walking. So I want to really focus on that. And especially when you talk about underserved communities. So when it comes to public transit, a couple of the issues that I see especially are funding and communication between the different agencies. So obviously, BART, Easy Transit, we know that they're struggling right now. And we need to make sure that our funding sources are not based on riders, because when we have things like the pandemic, we drastically lose the amount of funding that we get for these services. So we need to be looking at that, and also the communication between the different agencies. When it comes to biking, I totally support Complete Streets and also Measure FF. I've been carrying their literature with me as we've knocked doors, thousands of doors. And something else that I want to comment on here is that sometimes we pit bikers against accessibility features. And I think that that's wrong. I think we need to make sure that our streets are accessible for people who are in wheelchairs, walkers, strollers, etc. And also making sure that we have bike lanes that are safe for people. Just because we care about, safe streets doesn't mean we're talking about just bike infrastructure. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we're providing opportunities for people who do have bikes to get safely from A to B, especially kids. And when it comes to walking, I want to talk about how I support Telegraph for the People, and also, making sure that we have more avenues for folks to walk safely in our streets. I wish I had a little more time. I'd love to talk more about the equity piece, but I'll add that in the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Now we'll move on to the next question. As climate change exacerbates wildfires and extreme heat, how will you ensure Berkeley's most vulnerable populations are protected? What specific climate adaptation measures, such as nature-based public spaces and streetscapes that provide ecosystem services, do you propose to reduce climate vulnerability in low-income areas? We will start with Councilmember Sophie Hahn. You'll have up to 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the prompt.
No, thank you very much, because this is something that I've been very concerned about and have actually already done groundbreaking work in. So really the easiest and best thing we can do quickly, if we're talking about adaptation, right? We're not talking about reducing the risk. We're talking about managing it. That's your question here. Tree canopy is the easiest, cheapest, and quickest thing that we can do to provide cooling, shade. It actually provides sound barriers, habitat, and it's an excellent way to protect people against extreme heat. We have a lot of tree canopy in our hills, and we have a dearth of trees in areas that are lower income and closer to the freeway. And so I introduced legislation for Berkeley to pilot something called Miyawaki forests. They are fast-growing native species forests, microforests, that can be planted all over the city. This is being done all over the world. They have like a high-powered ability to absorb carbon. They can grow very quickly in 5 years. And our school district has already piloted a few. I wrote the legislation. We are launching 2 Miyawaki forests. We also have a very, very big program to plant trees in West Berkeley. And I'm very supportive of that and look forward to getting more money for trees and for these kinds of forests.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. Next, we'll hear from Adena Ishii.
Yeah, thanks for this question. It's super important. When I think about climate adaptation measures, a couple of things that I think about first are fires in the hills and flooding in the flatlands. And something that we know already is that if you live up in the Berkeley Hills and there's a fire, the chances of you escaping if the fire is already there are actually quite slim. And so it's very scary because there are many people who live up in the hills who won't be able to escape if there's a fire. And something else to keep in mind also that I want to mention is eucalyptus trees. Eucalyptus trees, because of the type of bark that they have, can actually send embers like 9 miles away. And that's basically as big as our city is. So we need to make sure that we're making changes to the trees that exist and that we are hardening our landscape so that we can prevent fire from spreading, especially from house to house. The other thing I was talking about is flooding, and that's really important because I live in South Berkeley in the flatlands. And I would say that this is a huge issue for us, not because we're necessarily going to have so much sea level rise, we will have that, but the bigger issue is actually how that impacts all of our sewer systems. And our sewer systems are actually not prepared to handle climate change and the impact of climate change. This is something we oftentimes don't think about or see. The infrastructure in our city that's below ground is not something that folks are really looking at. And so I'm really interested in making sure that we are taking these things into account, especially paying attention to communities of color when oftentimes we're not given the information that we need to make these changes. So thank you.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Next, we'll hear from Kate Harrison.
Yes, thank you very much. I agree, trees, 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 but also biodiversity. We have to plant trees that support animal and plant life. Many of the trees that we planted in the past in Berkeley are not natives, and they are not doing the job that we need them to do. So we have to change that paradigm. When I suggested that to the council, it was rejected. We need to provide lower income homes with HEPA filters and backup systems in case of emergency. This is something we can do with the fund I've already created, the equity fund. I'm also proposing expanding that fund by allowing homeowners to use the transfer tax when they buy a new property, or property owners, to make these kinds of changes, wildfire safety and environmental changes. Climate action is about fire safety, and I think we have to keep making that connection for people. Sometimes they're seen as separate entities. I helped write the equity plan while on the Parks Commission. I was on the commission for about 7 years. I've worked very hard to protect our waterfront, which is a natural space that we need to not allow be commercialized, not just for human access, but in order to provide the vital runoff that we need for water that's coming from these flood zones. Finally, I found the money to improve our aquatic park tide tubes, which is where the water comes from in the city into the bay. They were about to collapse under the freeway in a very low income neighborhood. We needed funds, and I found those funds, and we are doing that this year. So trying again to put together the money, but also recognition of the equity piece of this and how we provide these elements in areas that cannot afford it themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. Now we'll move on to the audience questions.
Hi, I'm Kiani Butsley, a UC Berkeley student and co-officer of Cal Habitat for Humanity Sustainability and Climate Committee, along with Theo. We will now be taking questions from the audience. Please input them in the Q&A function. And while we wait for audience questions in the Q&A function, we have a third question prepared for our candidates that I will put in the chat. Berkeley aims to become a zero-waste city. How do you plan to increase the effectiveness of waste management programs, including composting and recycling, especially in multifamily housing where waste sorting depends on everybody's responsibility? What initiatives would you introduce to create a more circular economy at the local level? We will start with Adena Ishii. You have up to 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the prompt. Please begin whenever you are ready.
Yeah, thanks. I love this question. And I feel like Berkeley residents already care so much about this issue. And at the same time, I think that it's oftentimes really confusing. I'll tell you, in our family, we oftentimes have disagreements about what is recyclable and what's not. And if you have to go to the city's website, or the Ecology Center's website, and figure out if your exact item matches an image, then it means that it's a little bit too complicated. And so for me, I'm really focused on helping families to understand what can be recycled, what can be composted, what are the rules around that. I feel like education is so important because the people who care about it will do the work to figure it out, and the people who it's more complicated, they need it to be easier. So that's another thing that's one thing that I'm looking at. The other thing that I think we could be doing more of as a city is encouraging some of the groups that already exist. So there are groups like Buy Nothing, and a lot of neighborhoods have like a free store or little libraries in them, so that folks can like reuse items that already exist. I think we can encourage some of those programs, and also just generally, I think that people have lost faith in the recycling system. So there are a lot of folks that feel like, okay, I'm going to recycle this, but probably it's going to end up in the trash anyway. And so helping folks to do those tours of the recycling center and see where our waste actually goes, I think that that's another thing that's important to help increase people's trust in our systems.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Next, we'll hear from Kate Harrison.
Yeah, we need to really start now. We always have that saying about reduce, reuse, and recycle. Recycling is the end of the system. We need to reduce first. We need to get away from a consumer society. Last year, I introduced the deconstruction ordinance, which asks that buildings that are tearing down buildings use the opportunity to recycle building materials. Much of that goes into our landfill. That did not pass the council, but it is an important way that we can reduce what's in our landfills. We also passed through the help of youth at UC Berkeley, what's known as the Better Berkeley Bag Ban. I did that a couple of years ago. Our compost bags that were being taken free in the grocery store were not being composted. All of the trash, animal waste you put in there, on vegetable waste rather, and the bags themselves were being thrown in the trash. We fixed that system. We also need to deal with the waste of food at the front end. Our systems are not set up for that. We have too much waste in grocery stores, people selling things in bulk, which is a good at one level, but many things are being thrown away. Finally, we need to really focus on the area of not wasting food altogether. People are buying and wasting food continually, and it's not okay. We can do that by moving to a more plant-based diet. A lot of this waste that occurs in the food system is from animal agriculture. I'm really happy to have worked with Berkeley youth at Berkeley College, City College, the campus, and the high school on several environmental initiatives, which I will tell you about more, but many of them focus on reducing our consumption in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Sophie Hahn.
Yeah, thank you. Reduce is absolutely the best way to achieve zero waste. It's not about how we handle what we throw out, it's about throwing out less. So I'm going to highlight three things. First of all, I wrote the most far-reaching anti-plastics legislation ever passed anywhere in the world, and by the way, with the help of UC Berkeley students. This is groundbreaking legislation that has been replicated in more than 30 jurisdictions in the United States, and it is recognized across the globe. This is the biggest game changer for zero waste in probably 50 years for the city of Berkeley, and that is my legislation. So we also need to work on implementing that better, because I see that restaurants and cafes are slipping. But I want to talk about other things. Multi-unit. I want to require, just like in a hotel, that on the back of the door for rental properties in Berkeley, that there be a poster that, one, tells renters their rights and how to get help, but two, explains to them what their responsibilities are with respect to separating, composting, etc., and for them to pressure their landlord if their landlord isn't doing it right. Finally, on circular economy, I have introduced legislation to create a share hub at the Berkeley Public Library. It will be the first comprehensive public share hub in the country, and I'll look forward to talking to you more about that.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. Now we'll move on to the next audience question. And to all our candidates, we have an audience question regarding wildfires in the Berkeley Hills, since that is an increasingly important concern for Berkeley residents. What efforts would you implement to make Berkeley Hills easier to navigate during a fire? And we will start with Kate Harrison. You have up to 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the prompt, and please begin whenever you are ready.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you. First and foremost, we have to reduce the number of cars in the hills. It's great to say we're going to have parking on people's property, but the minute that fire breaks out and everyone leaves in their car, we are going to have a disaster on our hands like they had in Malibu. We need to take advantage of the paths that we have through out North Berkeley. We need to also do what happened on Friday night. We were out canvassing in District 6 when we got the fire alert. I think it's good to tell people in advance you should evacuate if at all possible before anything drastic happens. We also need to continue to work on getting rid of the eucalyptus undergrowth, as Ms. Ishii mentioned. We have passed money from the committee I'm on, the 4x6 or was on, which is the Campus and Us, to reduce the undergrowth of eucalyptus trees. All the DOS that comes down is flammable and is very dangerous. Also, our fire department is doing an excellent job on reducing dangerous plantings. My home, they came by and told me what to do. We need to continue that program. Finally, we need to listen to our fire commission. They have several really important recommendations for how we use our FF fire safety money, and they have not really been followed. So it's time for us to stop making decisions centrally only at the council and to listen to the community. I'm not sure why Councilmember Hahn said it was a good thing that she did something without students. I think it's good to do things with the community. That's who we work with to get good things. We are not the smartest people in the room. Pretty much you are, and I need your ideas, and I need the ideas from my residents in this city to help me figure out what's going to work best for them in fire safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Sophie Hahn.
Well, let me just clarify. I said I did work with students, not that I didn't.
I
you know that. You know I work with them. I represent one of the 2 districts with the largest number of people living in the very high fire hazard severity zone. I've done a ton of work on this, including introducing legislation, actually passing Measure FF, which is giving us the money to do all these mitigations. So, and I just want to say that I love, less cars is a nice idea, but it's going to result in more people being incinerated. Unfortunately, we have an aging population in the Berkeley Hills. They're not going to be able to escape on paths. They actually need a vehicle to get out of harm's way. It's a sad reality, but saying that they shouldn't have cars is literally condemning them to death. Things we need to do that we are doing. We are already getting rid of eucalyptus. I've been working with groups and with our fire department on that for a long time, and we're making a lot of progress. Home hardening is something I'm looking at requiring home hardening at a minimum when people sell their homes to require them to do certain upgrades. We are enforcing vegetation management. We've already done a ton of vegetation management on City of Berkeley property, red curbing in tight and narrow spots. There's a whole big plan on this. I've been very involved, and there's many things that we can do to help, but we probably cannot reduce this hazard to zero. The fire danger is extreme.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. Next, we'll hear from Adena Ishii.
Hi, yeah, so thanks. This is really an important question because one of the things that I have learned from speaking with folks who live in District 6 and up in the hills generally is that they feel that a lot of the solutions that are currently suggested aren't necessarily that helpful for them because, as we've talked about already, some folks can only leave by their vehicles because that's how they typically get in and out of their homes. And so one thing that I think is important is that we really encourage the community organizing that's already happening. So there's like a fire safe council, there are different organizations, community groups that are up there. We should be utilizing those groups that already exist, encourage them in their organizing and help them to get the materials they need for their emergency kits and help them to also figure out how they can communicate with each other if they need to evacuate. Is it possible for them to carpool with a neighbor? Is there kind of a buddy system so that they can check in to make sure that folks get out in time? Because something else that you'll learn if you do any work with community groups that do this kind of public safety work is that unfortunately, when there's a major disaster like this, a big fire in the hills, they're not going to get to you in time. The fire department won't be able to get to you in time. And that's not their fault. It's just because they're going to be fighting the fire itself. And so it can be really challenging to get everybody out in time. Parking enforcement is a big thing that folks don't want to talk about, but we absolutely have to do that. Just having red curbs is great, but if we don't actually enforce the parking, then people will continue to block routes that are enabling people to get out in time. And then, the fire department's internship program with home hardening and creating more defensible space, that's all really great work. And I'd like to continue that. Thank you.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Now we'll move on to the final audience question. How will you make sure that community input is included in the planning process? What will the city do to provide safe east/west access to the new bike bridge at the bottom of Gilman, a terrible street for bikes? We will start with Councilmember Hahn.
Well, I strongly support community input on all of our plans and everything we do. I have held numerous, community meetings throughout my 8 years on council, where I still serve, and on many different topics. I also do, office hours at farmers markets, sometimes just town halls in general. And so I'm very interested in hearing from the community, whatever it is that we're planning to do. I also really welcome community input at our council meetings. Some of the other folks here have expressed that maybe we have too much input at our council meetings, that we ought to shorten them. I would love for our meetings to not go too long, but if the community is passionate about something and they're coming forward and they want us to hear them, I'll stay all night. So I'm very supportive of community input. I think we do a lot, but we always need to do more. And that will always be a high priority for me as mayor. And was there another piece to your question? There was one other small piece, I think.
Just to reiterate, yeah, it was regarding community involvement, and I think
yeah,
if you're
okay.
ready, we can move on.
I mean, there's other things we do. We sometimes put out surveys and things. So there's lots we can do. There's lots we're doing, but we never do enough. So I would like us to double down and really make sure that we're hearing from the community whenever we make big decisions.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. Next, we'll hear from Adena Ishii.
Yeah, I think the second part of that question was about the east-west access to the new bike bridge at the bottom of Gilman. And I would say that there are a lot of changes that are being made right there. So it can be very messy and feel very dangerous. And to be honest, I have not biked down there recently because I know that there's been so much construction. And yeah, I definitely think that as we start to use some of these new pathways, and we'll be able to identify when they're not safe and what needs to be done. Because I think one thing that I've spoken to a lot of community members about is that when we add bike infrastructure, sometimes it can be confusing for folks. They're not sure, like, can I turn into this lane? This goes around a different way than I'm used to. So making sure that we really educate the public, I think that that's really essential to help make that area safe. And then when it comes to public participation, this is something that I care a lot about as someone who is president of the League of Women Voters. We care a lot about input and hearing from different people. Democracy is supposed to represent all people. And I would say that a lot of folks, especially people who are parents with small children, don't get a chance to go to city council meetings, or people who aren't able to stay up late or don't want to go right in the middle of dinner time. Like, it makes it very challenging for them. So looking at, encouraging hybrid meetings, making sure we maybe provide food or water at the very least at our council meetings, I think would really help to encourage more people to show up. But also, I feel that people don't think they have enough opportunities to speak to council outside of public comment. So really encouraging those with town halls and continuing to meet with individuals outside of city council meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Next, we'll hear from Kate Harrison.
Yeah, it's really not enough to have top-down meetings where we tell people what we're doing. We have to have meetings where they tell us what they need. And that's what the community action plan was about. I was involved in that for several years. We need to demand more aggressive climate targets. That's what the community is asking us. Greening the Church, the Decarbonization Coalition, Transition Town Berkeley, all these organizations that I have worked with have said, you have got to speed up. This is an existential crisis. Your plans are too slow. Our plans are also not informative enough. We don't tell residents what the metrics are. I have asked that the climate plan show how many fewer gas-powered vehicles do we have this year? How much less waste are we producing? How many more buildings are being decarbonized? We need people to feel an excitement and a sense of involvement, and that does not come from the council saying, come to a council meeting. It comes from working in community. It also comes from working on our committees, which the council voted to cancel our committees for about 9 months. I thought that was really tragic. We need this committee structure. That's where we figured out the gas ban. That's where we figured out the Better Berkeley bag ban. That's how we got rid of plastics in the ocean, is using this committee structure. Nothing can happen effectively at just a big council meeting. At that point, much of the decision-making is done. And we do need to listen to people at that point, but we also need to recognize many of them are not clued in, and many of the decisions are already pre-made at that point. Again, I am supporting Measure GG, which is a community-brought initiative to tax large gas emitters, and they will be able to apply to get the money back to make their buildings climate GHG free. So we need to really pursue these items that seem scary and dangerous and sometimes to the private sector, and move ahead with what the community is asking us to do more earlier now.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. And we actually have time for one more audience question. What is your position on Measure GG, which would tax large users of natural gas? We will start with Adena Ishii.
Yeah, so I'm really sad to say I don't support Measure GG. I did spend quite a bit of time speaking to people who helped to write it and have been working on the measure itself. And I'll tell you why I don't support it. I think that when we talk about large producers of gas, I think that sends an image of like a large corporation, but actually this could really hurt a lot of small businesses and nonprofits. And I think that that's something important that we're considering, because after the pandemic, especially, there are a lot of small businesses that are really struggling here in the city. And although, people who own large buildings aren't supposed to pass it on to their tenants, they definitely can still do that. There's nothing to prevent them from actually doing it, to my knowledge. And, I think also one thing is that, if I think the purpose for Measure GG in the first place was to make sure that there was funding for people who were trying to transition their homes and businesses out of gas products. And so when we do something like that, I think it's important to think about who we're taxing. So if we're taxing only the large companies, that would be one thing, people who can maybe withstand an additional increase in how much they're paying. But when it impacts folks who are smaller businesses, that's what I'm concerned about. And if you look at the No on GG website, you can see there are organizations like the Berkeley Rep, Berkeley Bowl, different small businesses that can't transition over to electric powered equipment in a soon enough time for them to not be impacted by this tax. So, I just encourage folks to take a look at it. Like I said, I would have loved to support it, but I'm very concerned about our small businesses here and how that's going to impact them.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Next, we'll hear from Kate Harrison.
I hear what you're saying, Adena. However, we always say that. We always say we can't do it because it's going to impact. Some of these businesses are the same businesses that told us we couldn't increase the minimum wage, we couldn't do the fair work week. The numbers are very exaggerated. We had one restaurant owner say, this is going to cost me $69,000 a year, when in fact the entire building where she's in the base floor is only $27,000 a year. These organizations can apply for these funds and they will save money in the long run. That's the secret sauce of decarbonization. Going over to electric utilities saves you money because of the new technology of heat pumps. We need to educate people more. The same restaurants were against us doing the gas ban because, again, they were fearful of it. But in fact, without that, we are not going to reduce the 27% of emissions that come from our buildings. Finally, our rent control legislation is really clear. You cannot pass on these costs. I don't know why you're saying that. Finally, this builds on the climate equity fund that I created. It still uses the trades with people with fair labor rights to do this work. And it insists that we give the benefits directly to them so that property owners don't have to go figure out how to decarbonize. One of the biggest problems for people is understanding how complicated this is and not knowing how to pick a contractor. This forum of having a fund that allows you to pick somebody from our list and go ahead and do this work is going to be a really beneficial thing for small businesses and property owners alike. We're going to end up with them saving money in the long run, and we're going to end up with them reducing their GHGs. If we don't do this, we will never tackle the existing building stock. It's great I did the gas ban on new properties, but it does not tackle the 90% of buildings that are existing here in Berkeley today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Sophie Hahn.
Well, so this is a perfect example of how we lose on climate action. It's the right idea, and it's the wrong way of going about it. And I think it's going to be defeated, and it is the right idea. And I think that defeat is going to send a signal, not just throughout the region, but even across the country, that climate goals couldn't even be passed in Berkeley. So I think it is actually the kind of legislation that affirmatively sets us back. I'd like to say that the building trades, who ostensibly are helped by this, are part of the opposition. They are listed as being against Measure GG. So what is wrong with this? Why is it the wrong way to get things done? You cannot just say, we have to do this and slap it down on people. In the 2000s, the state required builders to put natural gas in because it was cleaner than the dirty electricity that we have. The cost of taking that out again, which is something we should do, is exorbitant. And the people who wrote this measure, which includes Kate and folks she's been working with.
No, I did not write this measure, Sophie. That is incorrect.
Please don't interrupt me.
I did not write it.
Please mute yourself so that I can finish my question. So the people who wrote this do not understand what it takes to actually transition. And it is so expensive to do that it is going to put some of these people literally out of business. We have to look at people as our partners, not our enemies. That is how I got my plastics legislation done, with no pushback, no opposition, and no litigation. These people are our partners, and if we want to have success, we have to work with them.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. Now I'll pass it over to Andy, who will moderate the food justice section.
Great.
Hi. Okay. This section consists of food justice questions. Now, okay, what is food justice? According to community organization Just Food, food justice looks like, and I quote, communities exercising their right to grow, sell, and eat healthy food. Healthy food is fresh, nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, and grown locally, with care for the well-being of the land, the workers, and the animals. Now, people practicing food justice leads to a strong local food ecosystem, self-reliant communities, and a healthy environment, unquote. Okay, now we'll go over the logistics. The format of this section is the same as the previous section, which with 90 seconds per candidate per question in alternating order. We'll start with the prepared questions. These questions were not shared with the candidates beforehand. We'll move on to the audience questions, so please start thinking about your food justice questions right now. All right. So food insecurity affects many Berkeley students, particularly students, affects many Berkeley residents, particularly students and low-income families. According to the 2022 UC Undergraduate Experience Survey, 31% of UC Berkeley undergraduates experience food insecurity. As mayor, how would you help ensure access to affordable, culturally relevant, and healthy food for all residents? How would you work with youth and community organizations to accomplish your goals? Okay, we'll start with Kate Harrison. You will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the prompt. Please begin whenever you're ready. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have a big pot of money called CDBG, which is Development Block Grants. And the city manager some years ago decided to stop providing food as part of that program to homeless shelters. And I think that is really, really tragic. I worked with students at Berkeley High to create something called the Berkeley Checkout Ordinance, which insists that healthy food be at our counters. When you're a student and you have half an hour at lunch and you run into that store and all they've got is junk food at the counter, that is not going to promote a healthy lifestyle. That has been a very successful measure in Berkeley, and we've seen very little pushback from the organizations involved, grocery stores, et cetera. I also sponsored Vegan Monday, which was an attempt to have us and restaurants begin to think about doing a vegan day, 1 day a week, just to start, to say, what does it look like to provide vegan meals? We also need to source our food differently in Berkeley. We need to make sure that we source less meat. We have a 50% goal of reducing our meat consumption in senior centers with youth, et cetera. That has not been met. In fact, there's been quite a lot of pushback from the council on that. And finally, we need to promote healthy drinks, which we've done through our sugar sweetened beverage. I want to thank Ms. Ishii for being on the commission, but frankly, the administration has stolen a lot of the money, taken the money for administrative costs, instead of working with groups like Healthy Black Families and Latinos Unidos to make sure that this money is going for healthy water and other foods for our youth and underserved communities. Finally, we need the African American Holistic Resource Center to be built, completed, and that's something I stood up for the funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay Harrison. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Sophie Hahn. You can begin.
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to say the city doesn't steal money from anything, and that is a terrible, terrible allegation to make. So if you don't like the way some money is spent, that's not the same as having money stolen. And I think we need to stop maligning our city in that way. So some of the things I've done around food justice and access to food. I introduced the Good Food Purchasing Program, which prioritizes sustainable, equitable food. The Farm Law, which was passed, which was authored and co-authored by myself and Councilmember Ben Bartlett. I wrote Berkeley's urban agriculture laws. I have my own urban farm in my backyard and 3 other backyards in Berkeley that I've been operating for more than 12 years. Now, so I have done a ton on I'm the foremost champion of urban ag and healthy diets on the council. It's unparalleled by anyone who's actually ever been on council. So let's talk about students. Berkeley Food Network is a great source. And I have helped establish Berkeley Food Network and continually work to ensure that they can get subsidized by the city. Farmers markets. I wrote legislation to allow low-income people to continue accessing food using their subsidy cards at our farmers markets. There should be, if there still isn't, a student food cooperative. There used to be one. If there isn't any longer, we should bring that back. So there's a ton that I've done and that I will do on this topic, but it's my work here has been very extensive.
Thank you, Councilmember Sophie Hahn. Next, we'll hear from Adena Ishii. You can begin.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier in my opening statement that I'm somebody who's actually experienced food insecurity. I was a student at Berkeley City College and actually, ironically, organizing an Alameda County Community Food Bank fundraiser and actually collapsed from hunger because I was myself experiencing food insecurity. So this is something that I understand on a very personal level. I think that it's amazing and also so tragic that we have to have a basic needs center at UC Berkeley. I think the work that they're doing there is great in terms of providing food. And also Berkeley City College now has a basic needs center as well. And so I really want to encourage those programs and especially help them to provide fresh produce to students. Also the Berkeley Food Network, as Councilmember Hahn said, they do really great work, want to continue to support the work that they're doing. Also with the Ecology Center, one thing I want to say is that many people feel that the farmers markets are not accessible. They're like, I'm going to spend $4 for a peach, you know, that's a lot of money. And so we do have some great programs that allow people to use their CalFresh money, which is their food stamps. But we really need to encourage the state to expand that instead of to decrease the amount that people are getting. Because right now that that program is in really high risk. I also really want to encourage community farms and gardens. I think that that is a really great way to help create a circular economy and encourage us to grow the food that we're eating in our community to help make our community more sustainable. So thanks for that question.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Okay, we'll move on to the next question now. All right. Food waste is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. How would you support local organizations to reduce food waste, improve food recovery programs, and expand the redistribution of surplus food to those in need? We will start with Councilmember Sophie Hahn. You have 90 seconds to answer the prompt. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you. And, the state of California requires this. So, I think not only am I on board with it philosophically, but it's literally the law. Berkeley Food Network, which was established by actually by community members in my district, and I work with them on the establishment. I help them get their space in a city. It's space that they have for free in the city facility and $100,000 subsidy every year. And they are this incredible hub where they are working with every single other organization in the city that provides food at no or low cost, and making sure that the food recovery, the food redistribution, the distribution of food that is not recovered food is all coordinated, centralized, and seamless in the city of Berkeley. And I am a huge, huge supporter of this initiative. I have fought at times when people in the community and other people on the council, not Kate Harrison, she was always with me on this, have tried to take away these subsidies. More than 8,000 households access food through the Berkeley Food Network every month. It's unbelievable how much food insecurity there is. And this is this powerhouse resource that is making sure that all of this work is done efficiently and effectively in Berkeley. And the best thing to do is to keep supporting them.
Thank you, Councilmember Sophie Hahn. Next, we'll hear from Adena Ishii.
Yeah, that all sounds really great. I think it's so important that we're encouraging a lot of programs that already exist. I think that's something that's wonderful about Berkeley and also really challenging is that there are so many different programs that exist in our city, and it makes it very hard for people to learn about them and for folks to connect with those organizations. So one of the things that I really want to talk about is just communication amongst organizations. I think that there can be a lot done from the mayor's office to provide opportunities for organizations that are doing work in the same area to collaborate better together. I'll tell you that oftentimes folks that I know who are involved in climate justice work, who are involved in our community gardens, many times those are often very white spaces. And I'll say that in communities of color, I often find that there are many people who feel very excluded from these kinds of spaces. And so I think we really need to be intentional about how we are reaching out and supporting communities of color, connecting to different programs, especially when it comes to things, excuse me, like when it comes to things like food access. So that's all I really want to say there. I think this is really important, and it's a challenging issue because it really has a lot to do with how individuals and families, how much they know about what exists and how they can get connected to programs that kind of help with food recovery.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Next, we'll hear from Kate Harrison. Oh, Kate, you're muted.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I agree that our coordination is not good. And I really appreciate Berkeley Food Network. They've done an excellent job. There was a threat to them staying in the building, which I know that Councilmember Hahn and I both fought pretty strongly because there was an attempt to move them after they'd set up this wonderful system of food recovery. But we are not coordinating well with existing programs. I've heard from the Women's Drop-In Center, other church-based programs, they would like to see more of this based in their communities. I agree with Ms. Ishii about that. Also, Dorothy Day does an amazing job of recovering food from organizations like the Cheese Board, et cetera, and also on a weekly basis to make sure that they get to people. But what we don't do is what's being done in the private sector. There's a group that allows you to go and buy food when it's past its sell-by date, but is still healthy to eat. And I've signed up for that. Too good to go. We need to encourage that as a city program. We need to think about these dates on food as being somewhat advisory, but not mandatory. We throw away so much food in America. It is the most depressing thing in the world. We also just need to put the money back that I mentioned before from community development block grants to homeless services, women's shelters, et cetera, that were providing food. Our former city manager said, well, they can find, philanthropy for that. I don't agree with that. Hunger is one of the main things that is driving people who are poor into more poverty and more inability to work and more inability to remain housed. So we have to fix that now, and we have to take back this funding source.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. Now we'll move to Alex, who will moderate the audience questions.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Alex DeFrega, a UC Berkeley student and officer of Cal Habitat for Humanity. We will now be taking questions from the audience. Please input them in the Q&A function.
I think local government is the most important level, having worked.
While we wait for audience questions, we do have a third question prepared that I will input in the chat right now. Rising housing costs are directly impacting food insecurity for many residents. How will you address the intersection of housing affordability and food access, ensuring that no one in Berkeley has to choose between rent and food? And we will start with Adena Ishii. You have up to 90 seconds to answer the prompt. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Yep. So housing and homelessness is one of my priority issues. So this is something I'm excited that you're asking about, because when we talk about climate change, something that we should actually be talking about is density. So one of the biggest contributors to climate change is transportation. And we know that in the Bay Area, that cost of housing is so high here that many people have to live very far away in order to be able to, commute to their jobs. So in the city of Berkeley, I know that many of our staff, our firefighters, our teachers, et cetera, have to live very far away because they can't afford to live here. So I'm someone who's supported, I've worked on measures O and P. O was an affordable housing bond. P was a transfer tax for homeless services. With Measure O, one of the things that we talked about when we were campaigning was providing housing for people like teachers, firefighters, folks who work in our city but can't afford to live here. So that's one thing that I think is important. Additionally, we haven't built a lot of housing at all. We've barely built any housing in the last 50 years. And so building additional housing, obviously we've done a lot more in recent years, but we need to be doing more of that. So I'm very supportive of the housing projects that are on the North Berkeley BART station, the Ashby BART station, which is near my house, the upzoning in Southside, and really encouraging the university, especially to build more housing for their students, because they should be providing, and I know they want to provide housing for freshmen and sophomores at the very least. And I think that that's important. I also really support the cooperative system, because that's a system that really helped me when I was experiencing housing insecurity, and I know they do great work.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Now we'll hear from Kate Harrison.
First, we have to stop losing the spaces where we grow food. So we have to build housing, but provide for food to be grown there. So there's a project on Dwight and Shattuck, which you may have seen in Fulton, that has food gardens on the roof. That's what we have to think about, is how do we integrate food into our housing? I was a co-sponsor with Councilmember Bartlett of his food utility item. Food is just as important as energy and housing, and we need to be able to say we're going to have more local control over that. Finally, I really think we need to be building the housing we are now. As Ms. Ishii mentioned, we have stepped up building housing recently, but we're behind. We're in a deficit of building housing. So we need to recognize housing and food as human rights and put our focus on that and not consider it an afterthought, which I think is what has happened in the past. Again, I'm really interested in these food utility areas, aquaculture, other ways of growing food in cities so it's close by. Our transportation system for food is one of the biggest climate problems we have. When we buy food from far distant places, when the cheese board gets water from Italy, that's a tragedy. We need to be promoting a local food economy. There are several youth groups oriented around that. And also, as I mentioned before, Greening the Church is oriented towards keeping our community food gardens. We're losing a food garden at the base of Gilman Street. We've lost a food garden at Ashby. We need to keep these gardens intact. So as we build housing, let's just not forget the food part of the equation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Sophie Hahn.
So housing affordability is the greatest local challenge that we have in Berkeley. And it drives homelessness, it drives food insecurity, it drives inability to pay for medication, and generally it drives poverty overall. So addressing housing affordability is the most important thing we can do around all of these issues. That is why I have been such a champion of housing during my 8 years on the city council, but also the 7 years that I served on the city zoning board before that. Between my 7 years on the zoning board and my pro-housing zoning officer on the board now representing me, we have approved more than 10,000 units of housing in Berkeley. On housing affordability, very much appreciate Adena bringing up measures O and P. She was one of many community members who helped pass that. I authored it, co-authored O and P with Mayor Adena and co-chaired the campaign to pass them. Without my work, we wouldn't have measures O and P. What they have given us is $200 million for affordable housing and to rehouse the homeless. With that money, we are opening doors to more than 1,000 affordable homes in Berkeley. And I have an ambitious plan as mayor to more than triple that, building on the experience that I have actually producing more affordable homes than Berkeley has seen since World War II.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. Now we'll move on to the next audience question. As a reminder, please input any questions you have on food justice into the Q&A function. Okay, we have a question in the Q&A function. Berkeley is famous for creating single-family zoning, which can reduce the space available to maintain community gardens and provide housing for Berkeley residents. How would candidates address this issue? We will start with Kate Harrison. Please begin when you're ready.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I think we need to integrate food growing into the housing. So for example, this project on Dwight is a really important example. We can't consider these separate functions. People need food where they live. So how do we do that? We promote more community gardens. We make sure that we have small housing added throughout the city. We can gently densify the city, but not lose the open space that allows us to grow food here. We can work towards a plant-based diet, which is something that I think we haven't talked enough about. This is not to insist that everyone become a vegetarian or a vegan overnight, but I did introduce Vegan Monday, which is an attempt to say, let's try to start down that path. Let's try to do the sourcing ordinance that the Councilmember Hahn mentioned has not been implemented. There are really no metrics. They were supposed to start measuring this in 2022, I believe, and that has not happened. So until we work through that, we're going to be really in a bad situation vis-a-vis food. We have to make food less expensive, less plant-based, more local. I'm not sure I answered all your question because it did not come up in the audience questions. Can you stop the time for a second? I didn't see it up there. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Rising housing costs are directly impacting food insecurity for many residents. How will you address the intersection? Oh, excuse me. That is the question from the previous section. Here's the question. Berkeley is famous for creating single-family zoning, which can reduce the space available to maintain community gardens and provide housing for Berkeley residents. How would candidates address this issue?
Great. I don't think I addressed that directly. I was the deciding vote to allow accessory dwelling units in the hills. And I did not say, Councilmember Hahn, that no one should have a car or no one's going to drive out. I think we should build that housing without having more cars or requirements for cars. We can do this. We can balance housing and throughout the entire city. There's kind of an emphasis in Berkeley on, well, go build it in the flats, go build it where poor people live, not throughout the city. We have a property right now, Oxford School in Councilmember Hahn's district, that is not being used and could be used for homeless housing. I'd like to see us take advantage of some of these vacant properties that are located other than in what they call the flats, largely districts 1 and 2 of Berkeley. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. Now we'll hear from Councilmember Sophie Hahn.
Well, as I said, I am the foremost proponent of urban agriculture on the council. I wrote our original urban ag laws that covered the residential areas where it was previously illegal to sell or trade homegrown produce. As a council member, I expanded on that, and we now have urban agriculture legislation and rules and regs covering every single district in our city. I think the question here goes to communal versus private gardens. And I want to say that I very much support the idea that we have more communal space and we use some of that space for growing food, and that we, that we have less private space. That is something that that I very much support, because I think food growing needs to happen throughout our community. As we build more dense housing, what we need to do is make sure we get green roofs. We can grow food on roofs, and this project on Fulton Street is a project that I approved when I was on the zoning board, and unfortunately, they're not growing food anymore. They're growing flowers. But we need to have more green and agricultural space on the roofs of these new buildings that are coming in, and that is legislation that I plan to introduce for Berkeley. And we need to bring a lot more food production into the urban core. And that is a way to reduce GHG emissions as well, and make seasonal organic produce available right here in the community.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. Now, next we'll hear from Adena Ishii.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was at the Harvest Festival last Saturday, and I kind of find it amusing because usually I feel like people or communities that have harvest festivals, have like big farms where they're bringing produce and they're, baking something that they grew in their own garden. And I'm not saying that that didn't happen. I'm sure that there was some of that at the Harvest Festival, but I would say that we definitely can be encouraging people to grow food more in their own yards. And also be, encouraging just generally, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the community farms and gardens that already exist. I love the idea of growing food and, donating it to the Berkeley Food Network and other organizations where folks are struggling with food security. And this idea particularly about single family zoning and reducing spaces for community gardens, one thing that I want to talk about that I was really excited about in the West Harmon neighborhood in West Berkeley is that someone actually gave up their backyard because they weren't really using it. They were, older folks, I believe, who didn't use their yard, and the community actually uses their yard as a community garden. So there might be, other opportunities, folks who don't really use their yard, who would really love to be able to have the community use it, that we can encourage that kind of shared space. So those are just some exciting opportunities that, like I said, we have a lot of things that exist already. It's about supporting the things that exist and helping to provide funding for them so they can continue their good work.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Now we'll move on to the final audience question. As a reminder, please input any questions you have in the Q&A function. Okay, well, we do have a final prepared question that I will ask now and input into the chat. What will you do to support urban farming and community gardens in Berkeley, particularly in underutilized public spaces? How would you incentivize local sustainable food production and reduce reliance on large agribusiness? How would you support diverting food scraps at schools and businesses for compost at community farms and gardens? We'll start with Councilmember Sophie Hahn. You can begin when you're ready.
Well, thank you. I was head of the PTA at King Middle School in North Berkeley for 7 years when my kids were going through there, and I actually attended that school myself as a child because I grew up in Berkeley. And that is the home of the Edible Schoolyard, Alice Waters Edible Schoolyard, and I spent many, many years supporting school-based food programs, helping our entire school district move to fight the FDA and bring organic local food to students. This is a movement that has actually gone global, and that is a kind of model that I continue to support. I have my own urban farm and CSA. It shows that we can feed Berkeley families with food grown in our own backyards. I put some links in the chat. You can see it. Would love to show it to anybody who's interested in visiting, but I am proving that you can viably grow food for the people of Berkeley using backyards. So 3 backyards, they're feeding over 20 families. And this is not just like a few tomatoes when they're in season. This is a regular production farm with a food source, and the farmers who do the farming are paid a living wage. So I urge you to look at that. That is exactly the kind of thing we need, and that is literally what I am doing myself and promoting in the community.
Thank you, Councilmember Sophie Hahn. Next, we'll hear from Adena Ishii.
My Wi-Fi seems to be cutting in and out a little bit, but yeah. So one thing that I want to also mention, I realized I didn't talk about earlier, was that I served for 3 years on the Soda Tax Commission, and one of the main things that the soda tax goes towards funding, it's by the way, the Sugar Sweetened Beverage Product Panel of Experts. One of the things that it goes to funding is our schools cooking and gardening programs. And that's definitely another piece of this is looking to support our youth and learning about food. How does our food grow? You know, how do we eat it? How do we prepare it? I think all of those things really help to create the next generation of urban farmers. And in terms of incentivizing local sustainable food production and reduce reliance on large agribusiness, I think we've talked a lot about that already, about how we would encourage, farms at people's yards and community gardens. The other thing I mentioned earlier was about the Ecology Center having a farmers market. One of the things that I learned when I spoke with them is that they really would love a space that is covered so that it's a little bit more protected from the elements. I'm really interested in identifying a space for them that they can use, and also potentially seeing if they can do another day, a farmers market day in another neighborhood where currently they have less access to fruits and vegetables. And then how would we divert food scraps to schools and business for compost? I think that there are probably programs that already exist, and to be honest, I don't know about them, but I would really love to figure out if they are existing and support them in connecting, because again, there's so much out there. We just need to connect folks to what exists.
Thank you, Adena Ishii. Next, we'll hear from Kate Harrison.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm delighted that people can grow food in their gardens, but to do that, you have to have a big garden and you have to have sunlight. And I think, again, this gets to the trade-off sometimes between building and open space. We need to make sure we build in the space to grow food here, as I've said before. Another thing we can do is, like the vacancy tax that I passed for the 1,200 long-term vacant housing units in Berkeley, a travesty when we have a housing crisis, we can do that with vacant lots as well. I have a vacant lot across the street from me. Every winter I go out there and I throw little food bomb packets over, hoping that something will grow other than the weeds that grow to 12 feet. And we have to get the fire department out. We have fires, we have rats. We have these vacant lots throughout the city, especially in the less well-off parts of town. We need to find a way to work with our schools to purchase these properties. Mayor Aragon and I worked on that for quite a while. We need to make sure that we look at these vacant lots is opportunities for food growing, and there's a lot of them in Central Berkeley. In addition, we have to make sure that renters have access to this food. A lot of the programs we were talking about are really based on homeowners. Renters need these gardens as well. And when landlords remove that facility from renters, they are denying them the ability to eat. So we have to be very careful about landlords saying, well, I'm going to take that garden away and I'm going to build an extra unit there, because that's going to be the day someone doesn't eat. And then finally, we basically need to take a moneyed interest. We need to say, you have a lot of vacant land. We want to use some of it for this purpose, and not accept the answer that, well, it's private property. We simply have a limitation on land in Berkeley, and we're going to need to find a way for all of us to use it in the most effective way possible, including feeding people.
Thank you, Kate Harrison. We will now move on to the closing statements. So that concludes the questions for the mayoral candidates. On the screen are shown the candidate websites to learn more about each candidate. We now invite each of you to make a closing statement. Adena Ishii, please go ahead with your closing statement.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking these questions. Like, I'll be honest, this is an area of policy when it comes to food justice and, climate change that we oftentimes don't get an opportunity to speak about. So I really appreciate that, the vitality of our community. I'll say that I think it's really important that we make these changes at a local level. And also, I think there's so much that needs to be done at a state level to make sure that some of the work, especially when it comes to renewable energy, is being done in a sustainable way. I am very concerned about our city doing actions that I find to be pretty performative. I've spoken with folks on the Environment and Climate Commission, and they feel that a lot of changes that we've said we were going to make in the city have not happened yet. There are so many opportunities for us to grow sustainable energy, to be encouraging biking and walking, help people get out of the cars, encourage public transportation, and just generally make some changes that allow people to provide to do a better job in terms of climate change. But I would say that, sorry, we only have a minute for that. I apologize. Can you hear me?
Yes, only 1 minute, but you can finish up the last sentence.
Yeah, let me just say that, that I'm running for mayor because I really think it's important that we have a reset at City Hall, and that we've had 2 city council members leave. And it's important that we have someone who's there to build compromise and to help us find connections around common sense solutions. And that's really what I'm focused on here, that I may not have passed all the legislation, but I'm somebody who knows how to bring people together and listen to what our people are saying that we need to be doing in our city, and make sure that we can make some change here that's not just performative. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Kate Harrison, please feel free to make your closing statement.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really proud to be endorsed by organizations that work with the people every single day. I'm the #1 choice of the California Nurses Association. I've been endorsed by the United Auto Workers that represent your graduate students, the National Union of Healthcare Workers, Unite Here, which is the hotel and restaurant workers, 350 Bay Area, the Green Party of Alameda County, East Bay Animal Rights PAC, the League of Conservation, and Cal Berkeley Democrats, and many, many others. I'm also endorsed by people that actually work in this field every day. Loretta Lynch, former chair of the California Public Utilities Commission, Claire Broom, Assistant U.S. Surgeon General, who's on the Sierra Club board, Larry Orman, President of the Greenbelt Alliance, Jean Walsh and Javanka Beckles, both AC Transit directors, former and current chairs of our Climate, Transportation, Parks Commissions, Gino Baricello, head of our Berkeley Indigenous Peoples Day, Diane Ross Leach, who's the head of the Audubon Society, she's on the director of the Audubon Society, and really local groups like Linda Curry from Transition Town and Aaron Dean, my Parks Commissioner. And finally, Cecilia Lunapara, the most environmentally advanced member of this Berkeley City Council. What you won't see is some of the current electeds who refuse to take on money interests in behalf of the climate. The failure to stand up for the gas ban is a tragedy. The failure to demand that we tax natural gas is a tragedy. And the failure to recognize our need to move to bike and walking infrastructure, as witnessed by what happened at Hopkins Street, is a tragedy. We need to get away from doing business as usual. We need to have a new paradigm. I love cities, and I love this city, but this city needs to move on with actual metrics and plans for climate and food justice that will actually make a difference in people's lives, and stop talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Sophie Hahn, please go ahead.
Well, thank you. I think it's a moral imperative for government at every level to address climate and environmental issues. And the presence of so many young people in Berkeley is a daily reminder of the urgency of this work. I'm incredibly proud of the work I've been able to achieve addressing climate, environment, and food justice issues in Berkeley as a community member and on the city council where I still serve. Progress takes more than good ideas. That's the easy part. And making progress as mayor of Berkeley is not for the untested or the faint of heart. Experience matters. Even with the best intentions, you cannot walk in cold and get things right on the city council. And tenacity matters because you have to be able to manage through stressful times. You cannot be a quitter and leave when the going gets tough. I am endorsed by the Jane Fonda Climate PAC. It is a national, prestigious organization that has never endorsed anyone previously in Berkeley. I am the #1 choice of the League of Conservation Voters. I was elected 5 times to the executive board of the Sierra Club. I received the Ecology Center's award for service to people and planet, and my anti-plastics legislation received the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board Award, the most important legislation passed that year anywhere in the Bay Area. I am endorsed by Berkeley's firefighters, Planned Parenthood. I have support from Moms Demand Action Gun Sense, SEIU, nurses, a supermajority of the city council, outgoing Mayor Adena, Vice Mayor Susan Wengraf, of a supermajority of the school board, mayors of Emeryville, Alameda, former Mayor Libby Schaaf of Oakland, more than 100 elected and officials across the Bay Area, and I am supported by more than 1,200 people, 1,200 people who have either endorsed or contributed to my campaign. I look forward to continuing this critically important work with you, students at UC Berkeley, other students in our community. We have to do this. It's an imperative, and I will continue this groundbreaking work as Berkeley's next mayor.
Thank you. And thank you all for participating in this forum.
Thank you very much.
Now we will transition to the voting materials and closing.
Thank you for putting that up. There's been a big delay in people receiving their ballots, and their voter pamphlets. This is very helpful.
The November 5th election is in a little over 2 weeks. In addition to choices for Berkeley Mayor and City Council, Berkeley voters will see candidates for local school boards, California State Assembly, California State Senate, U.S. Representative, U.S. Senator, and U.S. President and Vice President. There will also be local ballot measures and 10 state ballot measures. Please make your voting plan and participate in the decision-making process. You can either complete and mail your ballot anytime before or on November 5th. You can take it to a conveniently located drop box, or you can vote in person at one of 9 Berkeley locations, including the YWCA Berkeley/Oakland at 2600 Bancroft Way, Berkeley, a 5-minute walk from Sather Gate. You can find the locations at the link on this slide, beginning with alamedacountyca.gov. Please make a voting plan as soon as you can.
Thank you to the candidates for sharing your positions on these important topics. Thank you again to our promotional partners and to all of you who attended. Please remember to vote by November 5th. This concludes our Berkeley Mayoral Forum on Climate and Food Justice, organized by UC Berkeley students, Cal Habitat for Humanity, and local community organizations, and hosted by the Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action. Have a great evening.
I want to congratulate you and thank you for a great forum and really beautiful questions. Super well prepared. We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much.